Welcome to the Autism Support Network's video on ABA in schools. I hope to show you what a quality ABA program can look like in the classroom. So there is a home-based ABA team, and then there would be the school-based ABA team. What's important is that these two teams are collaborating together. On the home team, if you're running a home team, you would have your students, your behavior interventionists, maybe several of them, a lead behavior interventionist, the parent behavior consultant. And on the school team, you've got the student, same student, the ABA support worker in Surrey School District. We have specifically trained ABA support workers, or the educational assistant, the classroom teacher, resource teacher, principal, and then student support services is usually the administration overseeing special education in the entire school district. And sometimes school districts have in-house behavior consultants, and they may or may not be involved with your child's program. If you have your own behavior consultant, they will usually oversee most of the programming in the school. So each student's program, in collaboration with the teacher, the behavior consultant, the parents, and anybody else involved in the school, maybe the educational assistant or ABA support worker, each student should have programs that can target comprehensive curriculum design across the domains of academic literacy, communication, play skills, leisure skills, social skills, self-help, pre-vocation, like getting ready to go into the workplace, and behavior management, which would probably be the most important aspect of it throughout the child's schooling. And it should be individualized. Hopefully, the classroom teacher, resource teacher, parent, behavior consultant, and ABA support worker EA are all involved in the designing of the school-based programming. The goal here is to integrate the student into what the class is doing, and there's sometimes a myth out there that ABA is not about integration. You couldn't be further from that. ABA is all about integration. It might be a child needs to be pulled out to learn some skills first before they can be successfully integrated, but the long-term goal is for the student to be integrated with the class or classes as much as possible. And the long-term goal is to have individualized one-on-one curriculum where the student can work on prerequisite skills necessary to learn in a group setting or with a group. So for example, my son learned how to play clarinet a year ahead of time so that when grade 7 band started up, he was able to play clarinet with the band. And anyway, you want to be able to maximize the student's time. You'll see in a video coming up, sometimes the class is working on something that your child is not able to partake in. And so during that time, the person working with the child, the EA or the ABA support worker, can run programs that are suitable for that child. So that might be programs that are outside the classroom, but it might also be programs taking place within the program, within the classroom. So here's an example of, I've got a few coming in a row here. This is the student, this is actually my son here, grade 5, and he is in the classroom, completely integrated, sitting at a table with a group of students. And this is his ABA support worker or educational assistant. She has a binder full of programs. She'll be running a particular learning program with him, but at the same time, she's also running behavior programs. So he has a token board on his bracelet, and when timer goes off and he's been well behaved, he gets to take a token off and add it to a token board and eventually work for possibly going and shredding documents. My son, by the way, has moderate autism and he was moderately mentally handicapped. He could talk, but and he could do some academic programs, but he couldn't really have a conversation, and he also had really severe behaviors. And so programming for keeping his behavior under control was really important on a regular basis. So in this video, I'm going to show you what it looks like having ABA within the class.
Spelling out. Would you please take your spelling sentences and put them right here?
So the teacher is asking the other students to do something that my son cannot partake in. So he is continuing to work on a program that's individualized for him. The EA is taking data down here in this book as he does things. He just got them correct. Now what you're about to see, he's going to make a mistake, and she's going to take the eraser and erase it for him. This is because he used to find it very reinforcing to erase things. So he would actually purposely make mistakes so that he could erase something. So we found he was making more mistakes because it was reinforcing for him to erase things. This is where it's really important to have a behavior consultant involved. They recognize that this is a problem, so they say, okay, we're going to do the erasing, and that way he's not encouraged to make mistakes. Okay, in this next video, we are showing how he is going to be able to partake in an activity with the class. He was particularly good at spelling, so when they did spelling bees, he was able to do it with them.
Take a good look at your words. We're going to go through them right now, and we're going to do your unit test. So, one quick review.
So you can see he's sitting right with all of his classmates, and the behavior intervention, or sorry, the EA or ABA support worker often helps the other students as well. She's going to prompt him a little bit to get started, but once things have started, she's able to back off quite a bit.
You're doing lesson 3-0. What's your name on?
Eventually, she can pull those prompts off, and he would just listen to the teacher and do everything.
Here we go. Number 1, quarrel. Quarrel. One of the things I like about grade 5 students is they quarrel with each other very often. You guys are actually really good at getting along. That's much appreciated. Number 2, roar. When Josh tore the paper out of the sewer tank, you realize he could not hand it in.
So you can see she's able to step back. He's completely doing this by listening to the teacher, partaking along with the class. His timer has just gone off, which means he earned a reward for having good behavior. So he's still running some of his programs for that as well.
5, course. A university course lasts for about 13 weeks.
But this is something we had to work up to. He wasn't always able to completely partake with the class. This process was broken down, and he slowly built up to being able to be independent with the classroom on this. Okay. So in this video, you will see student walking with their aide. The student in the front is the child with autism, and his friend is walking behind him there. And this is an example of taking advantage, an ABA support worker or an EA that understands everything that needs to be worked on all the time, taking advantage of every learning opportunity. So they are demonstrating, she is talking to him. This is a higher functioning student, so she's able to explain to him why it's important to walk next to your friend. In this next video, we have a student who tends to shovel food into his mouth, and he's at risk of choking because of doing that. This is actually quite common. My own son did the same thing. We had these programs as well. And so the EA is, during lunchtime, making sure he's not shoveling too much food into his mouth, teaching him how to eat one food at a time. So that's the design of the program, and taking data on whether he's able to do this independently. So let me get this running. she's reminding him, takes one bite. So far, so good. And now he starts taking a whole bunch of bites and starts shoving it into his mouth, and she has caught this and is stopping him from doing it. Now she's writing down a negative sign that he didn't do the behavior properly. He took too many bites all at once. That data is really important because it's important to know when it's okay for her to back off, when he regularly eats only one bite and takes a break in between. They might even get to a point where he can eat one bite and hold on to it. It's just right now they need to get him to put it down so that he's not tempted to take that second bite. So this is the beginning of the program where he's learning not to shovel food into his mouth, and eventually once the data shows this can be possible, she doesn't need to be anywhere near him, and he will eat carefully and responsibly. This is a grade 8 band video, and one of the things that we had to work on in band was my son, this is my son again, being able to lift his instrument up when the instructor does this. So that is something that did not come naturally. He did not notice. Everybody else learned it very quickly. He did not know this. So the behavior interventionist, or the ABA support worker, had to take him in separate times of the day she would do this, and then she would prompt him to lift his clarinet up to his mouth, and then she would reward him, and then they would do this over and over again until he knew as soon as she did this that it was time for him to lift his clarinet up, and when he did this, it was okay to put it down. And then she would do it with the teacher. The teacher wasn't really interested in doing ABA. He just wanted to teach his class, and so he wasn't actually involved in this entire process. It was more about being next to my son and rewarding him for being able to watch that teacher very carefully. So see if you can pick out which one is my son. So he's about to start. And they lift their instruments. And there they go. So this is my son. This is his support worker. And later on, we actually got her to have a fake clarinet so that she looked just like one of the students next to him. My son knew that he needed somebody with him. He was confused about which music to play next, but he could play his music pretty much completely on his own. He could read music, but everything else was just way too confusing. He didn't know necessarily what music to play next, so she would prompt him in those. He always wanted someone with him during concerts. However, you can see how much he just looked like all the other students, and he loved band. That was his favorite course to take, and he took it all the way through to grade 12. One other thing I want to talk about that happened in band in grade 7, he was making his clarinet squeak. And he found out, my son figured out this was really funny, this squeaking sound. So he started doing it, and probably other boys did too, but he was doing it so much that the band teacher, a different one in elementary, kicked him out finally. So the support worker said to me, oh, your son got kicked out today in band because he kept making his clarinet squeak. So I said, you know what, we got to do something about this. So we designed a program where he had 4 Tootsie Roll tokens, and he got to keep the Tootsie Rolls if he didn't squeak. Every time he squeaked, he would lose a Tootsie Roll token, so then he only had 3. And now clarinets do squeak every now and then, so we didn't want him being unsuccessful. That's why we had 4 of them. Right away, he completely stopped squeaking his clarinet during band, and he never did it again. Eventually, they didn't even have to run the program. They slowly backed it down to fewer and fewer Tootsie Rolls, and eventually just a reinforce or a high five or something if they made it through without squeaking. So that's an example of ABA in the school in being completely integrated into, for example, a band program. Okay, so you want to set the student up for success. The programs are designed and implemented hopefully before the student even goes into the school. So it's really nice if you're doing some of these programs at home and then you know what's going to be going into the school. Super ideal if you can have the ABA support worker or the EA come into the home and learn these programs before you even start school. We had, my son did not have an ABA support worker or did not have someone trained in ABA in kindergarten and grade 1. And during those years, his behaviors got worse and worse, in particular his anxieties. He became anxious. about sounds. He couldn't go into certain rooms. Things were just getting worse and worse. So we decided to switch schools, more or less in hopes of getting a new, someone that might be better at doing the ABA. And we totally lucked out and got someone with 7 years experience in ABA. We also switched schools because he could then be in the school that his sister was in. She was in a French immersion program. He was in an English program. And so we had also moved to be closer to the school. So there was a few reasons that we had to switch, but the school had this really horrible bell. And so first we targeted being able to tolerate the sound of that bell. But when he started school with this new EA who was fully trained in ABA, new school, new teachers, new home, he just hit the pavement running. There were no problems. And his anxieties, we were able to target them, and he wasn't adding new ones because he had such a good ABA support worker program, support worker as well. So it's really important when you can have a really good ABA program going in, school just runs, and the parent can just relax. So the consultant is going to provide ongoing supervision of the student's program by participating in the IEP process. This is really important that you have the consultant at the IEP meeting. Now, in my case, the IEP meeting was more or less besides the point, because when my son started the first day of school, he had 30 programs, he had 30 goals, we had things that we knew he wanted him to achieve, and we were taking data right away on whether or not he was achieving them. The school didn't have to do anything. The teacher didn't. They appreciated having this done. They could focus on teaching the other kids. And then when we had the IEP meeting, mainly I would put things in there that I felt was very important that might not get done unless it was in the IEP. So when the consultant came to the IEP process, eventually, all they would have to do really in the last few years, and this is in Surrey where things are quite advanced in ABA, they were able to just bring the recommendations for the IEP, all the programs that he's currently doing in the classroom, and they would just accept them, sometimes just staple them to the back of the IEP and say, yep, this is what we're doing. When we first started doing this, ABA was not, in fact, Surrey has a great program right now, but it used to be that they did not at all. And we had a very toxic relationship with the Surrey School District, the parents did. And back then, every IEP meeting, I would have to bring my consultant in, and I'd be paying my consultant to explain, first of all, why it was important to do ABA. And after a few years, the school district became much more educated, and we were no longer having to fight for it. All we had to do at that point was just tell them, here's the programs that will work really well for my son. Anyway, the behavior consultant will also monitor any data that is collected and help make decisions on whether the program needs to be moved ahead or needs to be changed so that the child's more effective, more able to move on. Anyway, and they will do more assessment. Is there any other needs that the child needs to be working on? Program design, designing what the child should be targeting, and overseeing the implementation. So they would watch the EA or the ABA support worker and make sure that he or she was doing things properly with the child. And of course, this consultant also knows what's going on at home, so they make sure things are consistent between what's going on with the home program and what's going on with the school program. So once again, this is like utopia. This is like ideal if you can have this. The student report card it would be nice if they reflect the process of the goals that are in these scripted programs. Sometimes school districts only want to put 5 or 6 goals when the behavior consultant will have 30. In fact, they'll have 30 programs running, no problem. But the teacher and their report card, sometimes they only want to put on the report card some of these goals. Again, that's not that important. What's important is you know what your child is covering in school, what are they working on, and what do they need more work on, and how are things going. Really important if you're having difficulty getting your consultant into the school, to stress to the school that the behavior consultants are not in the classroom to evaluate the teacher. They're there to figure out how to help the student be successful, how to help the student learn in the classroom, what areas does the student need to work on before he can join the other students. So yeah, good to point that out. I think now the school districts are getting much more on board with this, and as they're getting more experience with behavior consultants coming in, this is not so much of a battle anymore. But it might be for especially a school district where you've had a change in administration. The new administrator may not be aware of how important it is to have the consultant in there. The goal is for the behavior consultant to design programs that helps the student participate in the classroom as independently as possible. As you could see with the spelling bee, that was something that my son could do quite independently. But other things, writing an essay or giving a presentation, my son might need help with that or a different way of doing it. Here's an example of how a student could have a separate area. So there's tokens on a board, maybe a program. This is probably a list of all the programs that the child is running through and where they're at this particular point. Over here you have various schedules, so you can use these to say what's going on in the day. Here is a box full of maybe reinforcers or programs or items that might be used in a program. The child would sit here and the ABA support worker or the EA would sit here. And then this is the table that the child will go to with other kids when it's okay to work with the other students. Here's another situation. This is an area off to the side where there's the binder. You can see all the programs that are in the binder. That's how many programs a child with an ABA program can work on in a school. And then the child will go over here to sit when it's okay to be with the other classmates. So this seems obvious to us parents. ABA instruction is occurring all the time, but when Surrey did decide to do the ABA support worker program, they called me in and actually started asking me questions, and they had no idea what ABA actually looked like, how it worked. They thought you would run a behavior program for 5 minutes and that would be it. And I explained to them that behavior programs are run all the time. You're always working on a behavior program while the student is doing all the things they do with the other students. So there might be times when parents have to educate the school system. By the way, I am a teacher, so I know what's going on in the school system, and it's not that I want to put the school system down or anything like that, but really no school district, no teachers are experts in applied behavior analysis, which is the most effective instruction for children with autism, except for the few school districts that have actually hired board certified behavior analysts. So when you go into a school system, you cannot expect them to know what to do. It's going to be up to you to educate them, and hopefully, unless a child with ABA has gone through ahead of you. So that is just something to keep in mind. But ABA instruction should be happening from the minute school starts to the minute the child is let out. If you don't have bell-to-bell cover, then you want to choose times that are going to maximize the deficits or excesses that child has. So for example, we saw the child who had difficulty eating, but might have done fine during free playtime. So they would not have the EA. The EA may have the break during the playtime, but during eating time, it was important to have the EA there running a program with that child. So you've got to decide where's the best place to put that EA if you don't have bell-to-bell coverage. And you have to balance it. Should it be during social time or should it be during academic time? One thing I want to say quickly, a lot of parents want to focus on that academic. They want to make sure that that child is up to date in their writing and their reading and their math skills. The problem is they may be up to date in that, but if they have no idea how to talk to other children, how to ask for things, how to do self-care, then they're not going to be able to get work. So this social aspect is really important, and don't let that go at the expense of making sure that that child gets a dogwood. A dogwood would be if you had no modifications in the program, you would get the diploma graduating from high school. So you can get that diploma, but if that person can't even have a conversation with another person, they're not employable. So keep that balance in mind as you go through. So program should a program should have discrete, objective written long-term goals, long-term objectives that will address a deficit or challenging behavior, target something. We'll see an example of that in a minute. And then it has short-term goals that will lead up to the long-term goal. Those are steps that will get us to that long-term goal. A program should have very specific teaching strategies, or what we call tactics, that are scripted. They're actually written out, so the ABA support worker or the EA knows exactly how to give a cue for the child to do something. For example, in the program where my son learned to lift his clarinet up when the teacher did this, this was the cue. And then the behavior was my son should put the clarinet up. And then if he did that properly, they had a reinforcement big party. They would script all that out, exactly what should happen and what should happen. If he didn't lift his clarinet up, what should they do? Should they prompt him? Whatever, right? And then the data, the way in which you collect the data is also scripted and taught. So each program should have these components. So here's an example of an ABA program in the school district. The long-term objective, this is for a child to sit in circle time. Now, I can speak with experience on this. I'm a teacher. I was a math teacher for 30 years, but I'm currently a teacher on call, and I go into anywhere from kindergarten to grade 12 into classes, and often I am a resource teacher because they're very short resource teachers for these. These are teachers that help with special ed students. And I was popping into a class to let a teacher know that I was coming later in the day because the resource teacher was away. And I watched the teacher was trying to have a circle time with a bunch of students, and one student was rolling around on the floor, running around, going under tables, and the EA was following the student saying, time to go to circle time, time to go to circle time, time to go to circle time. And the student wasn't going to have anything of it. He was what we call eloping. He was trying to get out of doing circle time. This is exactly what the child this program was written for was doing. So an ABA consultant can write a program to help get that child integrated with the other students, to be able to sit down in circle time with the other students. And that was actually the long-term objective of this program, was that the student could remain with his peers in circle time for 10 minutes without having inappropriate behaviors like lying down, complaining, yelling out, touching peers, doing stuff they shouldn't be doing. And then there is layers of that long-term objective. One where the ABA support worker is actually right there. Second would be 2 feet away, and then finally 5 feet away. So for this long-term objective, they then made this short-term objective. So first, they're just going to have the child sitting there for 30 seconds only. And then they let the child go away and they reward and have a big party. So here is the A, the B, and the C. So the A is the antecedent or the cue that you're going to give. The B is the behavior that the child's going to have. And the C is consequence for whatever that behavior was. So if you look at this, the antecedent will be, let's go to circle time, which is what that other teacher was doing, time for circle time, time for circle time. The problem is they didn't have a B and a C. They had no way of responding if that child did not do what they were asked to do. So, and also they probably made that child sit in circle time for way too long. They need to make it much smaller, reward that child right away. ABA should be 90% successful for a child. So they should very rarely not be successful. And that means you break things down so small and easy that it's easy for the child to be successful. So anyway, you've got the let's go to circle time. And for this first short-term objective, they're going to actually physically prompt the child to sit at the carpet. The behavior is that he remains at the carpeted area crisscross as is, or not properly done means he tries to get away or whatever, right? So this is the data you're going to be taking, and you'll see that on the data sheet that's coming up next. The consequence, if he did properly, is a vocal praise, yay, you did it, and a token. And then it says what to do when his token board is full. If he didn't do the correct thing, they will correct him. They will actually make him just sit there and maybe restart the timer. And so the criteria for success was twice he will sit nicely 18 times out of 20. So this, again, is just a breakdown of how they're going to reinforce what he does. These are short-term objectives. So they're going to start with 10 seconds, then 15 seconds, then 30 seconds. And as they move up, the reinforcers also changing a little bit as they move through the programs. Okay, here's an example of a data sheet for this. So they may not do all of this in one day. They may do this over a period of several days. And he was successful 11 times out of 20 in the first set of 20. And then they do it again, and it's 13 out of 20, then 17 and 18 and 19 out of 20. So for these two, he met criteria, and that's why they start short-term objective B. And then, of course, the data goes way down because now he's there longer. So there's a bigger opportunity that he's going to misbehave or try to escape from the situation. But then this data, these pluses and minuses, and remember, the plus means he did the correct thing, the minus means he didn't do the correct thing, okay? Then that gets graphed. And the beauty of the graphs is you start seeing this arcing. So he doesn't start off that great, and eventually he meets criteria. Then you start the next STO and you start low again, and you're hoping to get these curves like this all the time. So this is what it can look like when you have a really successful ABA program. New objective, quickly going up, mastering it. New objective, starting low again, quickly going up, mastering it. New objective, new short-term objective, starting low again. This is the sign of a very successful program. He's clearly learning something, because when you went up to the next objective, his data wasn't that high. And then he built up the ability to be able to do this. So that's the sign of a really, really good program. This is a sign that a program has problems. So when you've got this bouncing up and down, or even just a leveling off of data, the child is not getting better. In this case, it could be because two different people have different expectations. And so sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're not. But in any case, for this program, the consultant needs to come in and figure out what to do to change it. Maybe make the task easier, maybe find out why one behavior interventionist is doing things differently from the other. Whatever it is, you need an expert in there to take a look at this and find out what's going on. Now, if you didn't take data like this, you may not know if you're dealing with excellent data outcome, or if you've got a problem. So it's really important you have the data so that you can tell if you're having success or not, if the child's getting better and better, meeting criteria. Okay, so here's an example of a school-based curriculum for a kindergarten, a beginner learner. As you can see, it covers academic literacy. So this is like the developmental skills. So developmentally, a child at some point should be able to color inside the lines. That is also, by the way, a fine motor skill. So again, the behavior consultant can design these programs. You do not need an occupational therapist to design them, because behavior consultants deal with fine motor issues all the time. And usually it's not so much that there's a fine motor issue, it's just there's not a reinforcement for a child to hold a pen. So when you reinforce them properly, they will happily hold a pen. I'll give an example of that in a bit. Anyway, so these are the academic literacy, and then you have communication. So they're still working on language. They still might be working on asking for things. Each program is going to completely vary depending on the student. And then we've got an expansion of community reinforcers. That means learning to do things that other people do and have fun at. So learning to play next to somebody, learning to take turns, learning how to throw a ball. So we all need leisure skills, and it's really nice if our kids can interact with other kids socially. And then we've got self-management skills. So in this case, deep breathing is going to be to try to cut down on anxiety. So if you're starting to get anxious about something and you say, okay, let's breathe deeply, let's do 10 deep breaths, then if that student's already practiced that, they're going to, even though they're anxious, they're just automatically going to know how to do some deep breathing and get themselves calmed down. So these are self-management, dealing with difficult behaviors. Here's the sitting at circle time, because this child was probably lolling around instead of sitting nicely in circle time. Walking with somebody instead of in front of them, so on and so forth. So these are mostly behavior management. And then here's some examples of programming for a grade 6 student. This is someone who can start editing themselves. So again, academic literacy, they can do spelling, 3-step directions, see how specific this is, typing, draw and then write, reading comprehension, and they'll be specific about what level that'll be at. And then you've got the language skills. Language for learning is a particular program that was used to teach how to give a presentation or how to write an essay. And verbal reasoning, speeches, and projects would come out of there. And then you've got the community reinforcers again. So conversations, this child needed a scripted card to help him make conversations with other people. An independent lunch routine, being able to get his own lunch out, asking a peer to play. And then out here, we've got the behavior programs once again. So this was a child that could have extremely challenging behaviors. And so working on regulating, like a reduction of anxiety, was really important. Now, here's an example of the meaning, the definition of instructional control. So some people focus on the word control. This does not mean to have control of somebody. It means to have instructional control, which means when you ask the child to do something, they will do it to their best ability. So what we have here is, this is where there was an ABA support worker, someone really good at ABA. We're working with the child, but then the behavior consultant came in, and the ABA support worker and the behavior consultant had to go off and talk. So meanwhile, an EA came to sit with the child, and the teacher wanted them to write something and then draw a picture. So this child, wrote this down, drew this picture. Then the ABA support worker came back and said, oh, he can do way better than that. This is just not up to his full potential. So she had him redo it. And this is what he did under her. Not because she's an awesome person or anything like that, but because she knew how to have instructional control over him. She knew how to reinforce him. He knew if he did well for her, she would have a high five or reinforce in some way positively. So instructional control doesn't just mean you have control over their behavior, that they're behaving nicely in the classroom. It also means that they are learning to their fullest potential, that their output is to their fullest potential. This is a term I use a lot when we are looking into advocacy, advocating for children. Okay, so when something's not working, when that data is going like this, you need to change something. Use that data to figure out when that needs to happen. And you need to change the tactic, or you need to change maybe the environment or whatever. Something needs to change. The student is always right. And this is kind of hard for some teachers, because teachers always feel like if the child just went home and did their homework, everything would be fine. But sometimes we have to look at, how did we teach it? Did we break it down enough, or was it just too much for the child? So I tell you, when I did ABA with my son, it really radically changed my teaching. And it can change parents, how they do things in the home. Sometimes we ask our kids to do something that's just unmanageable. It's way too big, and then we all get frustrated. So ABA is really good at breaking things down. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about positive behavior support. Sounds positive, but is it effective as full ABA? This is a very important question, because positive behavior support, or PBS as it's known, is a usual go-to for educators. Positive behavior support is actually derived from ABA. It is a section of ABA. A section of ABA that will not use aversives. So what is an aversive? In one example, my son was licking plants. I talked to you about that earlier. And so when he was out for a walk, he would go and lick plants. Well, I had a consultant that only wanted to do positive behavior support. She was not willing to do aversives, anything else from ABA. And so she was trying to reinforce good behavior for him whenever he went out for a walk. So he would go for a walk, and for a few seconds, he would not lick plants. So he would get a reinforcement, a little token or something. And then he would go and lick the plants, and he would get nothing. But he didn't make that connection that he would only get these tokens if he was having good behavior. I then switched consultants to a consultant that was okay with doing aversives. And the aversive was to give him tokens where he would win a reward if any of them were left at the end. And every time he licked the plants, he would lose a token. We actually did research to make sure we knew how often he would lick plants, so that we knew he could be successful. So as soon as he saw that token being taken off, he suddenly understood that was something he wasn't supposed to do, because he would lose whatever it is he was working for. So that aversive was able to let him see immediately what his behavior was that he should not be doing. Another aversive that I talked about earlier was in his band program, when he was squeaking his clarinet. he would get, we actually started with Tootsie Rolls because we really wanted to stop this behavior really quickly. And every time he squeaked his clarinet, he would lose a token, which represented a Tootsie Roll. So that is not considered to be part of positive behavior support, but it was extremely effective in helping my son manage his behavior. So that is the disadvantage of positive behavior support. In an ABA program, there's lots of times we use positive behavior support with my son. For example, you saw the video of him. The timer would go off. He had good behavior, so he got to get a token. So that's positive behavior support. Another aspect of positive behavior support is that it is more focused on the antecedent, or on what happens before a behavior, instead of on what happens after the behavior. So in ABA, you might change the antecedent or you might change the consequence. So in positive behavior support, you tend to focus more on the antecedents. So if doing circle time really makes a child start screaming and yelling and stuff, you just don't put the child in circle time. So that's the positive way of avoiding bad behaviors from that student. So rather than moving that child forward and getting him into circle time and learning new things, you just avoid circle time. Same thing I've said in previous videos, my son had a problem with microwaves. We couldn't go to a home unless we targeted the microwaves. Well, the positive behavior support solution might be to just don't show him microwaves. If we go to someone's home, get them to cover up the microwave. That's providing an autism-friendly environment for him. We'll change stores so they have times that it's autism-friendly to bring kids into the store. So it's a big movement right now to change environment for people with autism, which is nice because some kids don't grow out of some of these things. But ABA usually can help these students get beyond those issues. We don't have to change the world around them. We can help them learn to be in that world. In the schools, I'm, as I said, a teacher on call. I'm often in classrooms, kindergarten to grade 12, and I sometimes observe little learning due to lack of instructional control. And I think that's where ABA, full program of ABA, can gain that instructional control. Often I hear teachers just saying, oh, well, little Johnny over here, just let him do whatever he wants. Don't make him do the work because then he'll have a tantrum. So that's changing the antecedent, changing the expectation or the cue. If he's going to start tantruming, we just take away whatever it is. That's why he's going to tantrum, because he doesn't want to do this. But in ABA, we slowly teach them to want to do those things. So let's be careful of positive behavior support. Okay, there is research that shows the success of ABA in the classroom. There's one study in 2002 where this was done in Norway, but it had researchers from North America and Norway involved. And they had a control group, that means kids that were in regular education. Regularly supported education. So they had general education support one-on-one. And then there was the treatment group where they were going to get one-on-one support, but it was in ABA, or in this study, it's called EIBI. So the control group is really what we do here in BC. Most students in BC get general education support. EAs, educational assistants, go to training in general education, special education. They do not get ABA training. They might get 5 hours of ABA training. But remember when I talked about the Surrey ABA support worker program, those ABA support workers have 1,000 hours of ABA training. So there's a huge difference. Generally, the EAs do not come in with ABA training, and nor do the educators, the teachers, the resource teachers. They don't have ABA training either. So they have general education training, general education for any disability, not just autism. So that's the two groups, and here's the outcome of the study. I made this graph. It is not the graph that came from the study, but I took the numbers from the study to demonstrate how effective ABA was. So the control group is in red, or whatever color that is, and the EIBA group, or ABA, is in blue. And so what they did was, regular students or their peers were about here, and the ABA, or the autistic children, were here. And they then looked a year later what happened as these kids got older. And in terms of adaptive behavior, the control group made no gains relative to the peer group, whereas the EIBI group here, they were able to catch up a little bit. In expressive language, the control group actually got further behind their peers. So the gap started getting larger, whereas the EIBI group or ABA group, the gap got closed up with expressive language. And then language comprehension, same thing. And then with IQ, the general education group did make gains. They did learn things, but the EIBI group definitely learned a lot more. So you can see, if you're asking a parent, which group would you have wanted your child to be in? General education, one-on-one support through general education, or one-on-one support with ABA? And we're not talking about spending more money here. We're talking about same amount of money, just teaching in a different way. Okay, so that's the end of ABA in schools, and I'm hoping that you have an idea of what gold standard ABA support can look like in the classroom. And if you're a teacher or an administrator, I really hope that you open up to talking to parents that are in your school district to talk about how you can best support those children. Some school districts have a lot of parents that are running ABA programs for their children, and then it would be ideal if behavior interventionists can go into the school like they do in Surrey. But some school districts, very few people are doing ABA. It's just not reached that community yet. And in that case, it would be a good idea for the school district to at least hire a BCBA, a well-qualified BCBA, who can, for at least students that have extremely difficult behaviors, can write programs such as the Entering Circle Time program that I showed you in this video. So having someone that works for the district that does do ABA, because honestly, most districts do not have a personnel there, somebody that works for the district that actually knows ABA. If you're a parent, I do recommend you watch the Advocacy video, learn how to advocate to get what your child needs, and to possibly advocate for a system that will support your child more, either in the community or in the schools. It was the Surrey School District parents who got together and advocated to get BIs hired by the district. That's what started the ABA support worker program. That was due to parents advocating. So once parents can collaborate with school districts and design programs that work well for everybody, that's when our kids can have the best outcome. And that's it for this presentation. Thank you very much for joining us.